Welcome to our monthly lecture series. This month, Marco Barricelli will be addressing us. Marco is a graduate of the Juilliard School and has been an actor, director, and educator since 1982. He has worked on Broadway and with many of the nation's major regional theaters. From 1997 to 2005, he was an associate artist at the American Conservatory Theater in San Francisco, acting on the Gary stage, as well as directing and teaching in their Master of Fine Arts program. He spent 8 seasons with the Oregon Shakespeare Festival as an actor, performing the roles of Cyrano de Bergerac, Hamlet, Richard III, and Henry V, among others. He was the artistic director for the Shakespeare Santa Cruz from 2008 to 2014. His performance credits include A Moon for the Misbegotten, The Real Thing, American Buffalo, Glengarry Glen Ross, The Invention of Love, A Streetcar Named Desire, Les Liaisons Dangereuses, The Three Sisters, For the Pleasure of Seeing Her Again, in which he was acting with Olympia Dukakis, and The Rose Tattoo, among many others. His directing credits include Hamlet at the Utah Shakespeare Festival, Glengarry Glen Ross at Denver Center Theater Company, The Miracle Worker at Alabama Shakespeare Festival, and Twelfth Night at Shakespeare Santa Cruz. He has translated Pirandello's The Mountain Giants and Right As You Are If You Think You Are, as well as co-translating and acting in a one-man adaptation of Pirandello's novel, One, No One. Teaching acting has taken him abroad to the Accademia Silva d'Amico in Rome, as well as the Prima del Teatro in Tuscany, where he created an exchange program between the MFA Conservatory at the American Conservatory Theater and the Prima del Teatro. His honors include being named a Fox Fellow, a recipient of grants from the Shara Soar and the LJ and Mary C. Skaggs Foundations, and he received an honorary Master of Fine Arts from the American Conservatory Theater. Since joining UCSD in the Department of Theater in 2014, Marco has taught acting and directed 2 productions of David Herndon and The Green Cuckoo by Arthur Schnitzler. He tells us that he joined our faculty because being the father of a young child made his previously itinerant lifestyle untenable. He respected the extraordinary UCSD theater program and its faculty, and he could enjoy riding his motorcycle year-round. Not necessarily in those orders of importance, but he is an enthusiastic motorcyclist. Marco, would you like to talk to us about preparing actors?
I sure will. I want to thank everybody, first of all, for having me here and allowing me a little window into this group. I'm sorry that we're not in person. One of the things, I love motorcycles, but I hate technology. And so I'm not really great at this. I think if we have time at the end, I would like to try to share screen, so maybe I could get some text up on the screen for everybody to see. But that remains to be seen because I have a phobia about all this stuff. Although we should be better at it now because we've all been through this here. I think in the interest of time, I'm going to just try to read what I've put together. and I hope to have time at the end for some questions and answers. Okay, so what I'm going to introduce you to, and unfortunately this is just an introduction because in 45 minutes, this is the stuff that I work with for over 3/4 with my master's students. But what I'm introducing you to here is only my way of working with students on Shakespeare and heightened texts. And when I say heightened text, that refers to any kind of language that has characteristics that distinguish it from everyday speech. I do not believe that my way is the only way. I distrust gurus or authorities in any form of art. And though it is unadvisable to start a talk with negatives, I feel I must disclose to this learned assembly of Emeriti that I am most decidedly not an academic Shakespeare scholar. I am merely an actor that has had a lot of experience performing, directing, teaching, and working on Shakespeare, as well as having been artistic director of a Shakespeare theater for several years. I teach actors to do Shakespeare. I try to help them arrive to the first rehearsal of any Shakespeare play. From there, something else takes over. And I feel that that next phase of the process is not within my purview as a teacher. So today I want to talk a little bit about the reasons I teach what I teach. And then if we have time, try to run very briefly through what it is I focus on when I teach. Not obviously covering every single aspect, as that would take more time than we have, but I'd like to cover some of the most important ones. But we'll get to that later. So, because acting is an art form, there is, of course, an indefinable, mysterious side to the work, something that I feel is impossible to define, something that is part inspiration, part imagination, part personality, part soul, part life experience, part upbringing, part accident, part gift, et cetera, et cetera. I'm reminded of, I have had, and I'm going to drop a name here, but I've had the pleasure of working on several occasions with a playwright named Tom Stoppard. And Tom was talking about the sort of magic of acting. And he described it from a writer's point of view. And he said this beautiful thing. He said, if you watch an actor, a writer write, if you were at a distance watching this process in action, what you would see is a writer sitting there with a pen and paper, and he would scratch his pen across the paper. And then at a certain moment, he looks up and then goes back to scratching on the paper. It's that moment when they look up. That's the moment of magic. That's the moment of all the things that I feel I can't teach. Those are the things that make the work art with a capital A. These are what make the art worth hearing, seeing, and experiencing. It is something ineffable. It is my contention, and many disagree with me, that these qualities are realized only by experience. They cannot be taught. There is no book good enough, no number of words on paper to be read, no performance inspiring enough to watch, no teacher brilliant enough in the classroom, hate to say it, but it's true, to make students good actors. My work is merely a supplement to the real work of doing it, a way to prepare the actor so that when inspiration hits, they are ready and available to follow its lead and share it with an audience. It is utterly experiential. Students must cultivate patience and know that they're playing a long game. If one accepts this premise, and as I say, many don't, then what exactly can we teach? Or I should say, what exactly can I teach? What is the purpose of a training program for actors? Well, this is what I strive to do. I teach them what I consider the basics, the scales. I teach them what to look for in heightened texts. I can teach them everything that is separate from the real art of doing it, so that they can take everything that is innate to them and their life experience and give it a pathway to expression on stage. Just like the ability to play a concerto cannot happen in one lesson, a musician must first play scales over and over again in order to become dexterous and allow expressive impulses their freedom to fly. And then, of course, they must practice the concerto over and over again until they have gained enough of a habit to play the whole thing effortlessly. Or better yet, allow it to play them. Only at that point is the musician able to express any of their own truth through the music. However, once in performance, their focus should not be on any of these techniques. They must forget these techniques and allow themselves to be surprised by each moment on stage. Like a dancer dancing a ballet, they are not thinking of bar work or jeté or plié as they dance, nor is a violinist while playing a concerto thinking about notes on a score. They are only expressing their connection and truth through the movement or the music. Technique, the stuff that I teach, is also separate from feelings and emotions. Everybody associates those two things with acting, but what I teach is separate from that. And this idea tends to really disappoint students when they start studying with me, because they're really eager to know how to cry on stage, for example. Well, I believe that is utterly misguided and frankly, none of my business. I like this image for the use of technique. I think of it this way. It's like an old hose that has been sitting in the garden for a long time, perfectly suitable for its job, but clogged from being unused or kinked from not being used correctly. The technique allows us to clear the debris from the hose and get rid of the kinks so that the water can flow unobstructed and the hose can be used to its best potential. The water is their talent, and ultimately it must be free to flow. The water is already within them. I do not have enough hubris to believe that I can create water, just a way to access it. Neither I nor anyone else, I believe, can teach them talent. We can only teach them the techniques which allow whatever talent is innate in them to flourish. It's akin, and I think of it this way, of course, it's akin to a motorcycle mechanic learning the fundamentals of a motorcycle's components, how to take the engine apart, what tools to use, how to make it run better. So an acting student must learn the fundamentals of the components of Shakespeare's texts. Now, it should be said that this training will influence all the work they do, not just Shakespeare. And lest you think I am too narrowly focused on classical art, let's not forget the best jazz, rock and roll, R&B, Motown, hip hop, rap, etc. musicians are consummate, meaning they ain't dilettantes. You may appreciate one style of music over another, but whatever your musical taste, it's the most skilled, meaning most technically competent artist that you want serving it up to you, most especially when they have married that skill to their own innate talent. And in any genre of music, the best musicians start by studying their craft, doing what? Playing scales over and over again. This is the technique. These are the fundamentals. Since the vast majority of students I encounter have very little or most often no experience acting Shakespeare, it is important for me to start at the beginning. What follows, in essence, are the scales for actors learning to act Shakespeare. Actors must learn to read the notes, i.e., the language. Even though a musical phrase has a number of defined and unalterable notes, it is capable of infinite variety. It can express anything. The very same can be said for Shakespeare's texts. The words are unalterable, but possibilities for interpreting and playing them are boundless. Shakespeare tells the actor when to go fast and when to go slow, when to come in on cue, when to pause, how long to pause, when to stress a particular word or series of words, and so much more. He tells them when to do it. But the most beautiful and miraculous gift he's given us is that Shakespeare never tells the actor why. He trusted actors that much. Adrian Noble, who I'll be quoting a lot, is the former artistic director of the Royal Shakespeare Company. He also uses the metaphor of music when he teaches. He says this, quote, "The measure of music is the bar. The measure of Shakespeare's language are the lines. Beethoven's music is notated in bars, so is John Lennon's. Shakespeare's notations are in the language. When a violinist picks up a Beethoven score, he will pretty much know what the composer intended from what's on the page. Likewise, when you open a book of Lennon songs that say, Imagine, there will be enough information in the score to play and sing the song. It won't make you a great musician or a rock star, nor will it show you how to interpret it, let alone make it yours. But assuming you can read music, you will have a pretty good idea of what the composer wanted to hear," end quote. I want my students to have an idea of what Shakespeare heard in his head as he wrote. Of course, one can ignore these notations and turn Imagine into a rap song, which is fine. And I hope they do that in the future, but that's not my business. And that's not what I'm here to teach. That is for their lives well after school. I want to help them to read and identify what Shakespeare intended and show them what possibilities this opens up for their artistry in the future. So, in actual fact, deciphering Shakespeare's verse and prose is relatively simple. I know everybody hears the name Shakespeare and they think of big, gigantic, esoteric, deep, poetic. It scares people. But from my point of view, it's actually very simple, these facets to look for in the text. There are basically only 10 elements to understand. Striving for the mastery of them, of course, well, making them their own, that takes a lifetime. The question students must ask themselves is what these 10 elements mean to them. And their answers will be as diverse as the people asking the question. Now, I've been around long enough to know I don't expect that any of my students are going to make their livings doing Shakespeare after they get out of school. I suspect it will only be a part of the work they do in the future. Most of them will concentrate rightly on television and film, etc. When I went to school, one could aspire to a career doing mostly classical theater in this country. but that's not the case anymore. I often say to my students, sure, if you go into classical theater, you stand to make literally hundreds of dollars in your career. But it is undeniably true that these classical techniques will serve them in virtually every single play, TV show, or film that they do. If they can play Shakespeare, they can play anything. The opposite is not true. I believe that between the covers of a complete works of Shakespeare is a comprehensive record and chronicle of the entire human condition. If you open yourself to his insight, you open yourself to a connection with humanity and the human dilemma. I, perhaps ashamedly, tend to think that actors and directors striving to make Shakespeare relevant are missing the point. Shakespeare is relevant. Instead, I believe a striving for simplicity with Shakespeare might serve us all better. But in order to do that, an actor and a director, they have to have a skill and craft. Adrian Noble again said, quote, "To some degree, it can be said that Shakespeare invented human character, or at least describing human character, not divine human character, secular human character," end quote. And as Hamlet says, an actor holds as 'twere the mirror up to nature, to show virtue her own feature, scorn her own image, and the very age and body of the time, his form and pressure. Shakespeare wrote principally in verse, and no matter what you may feel about that, verse is undeniably a heightened form of communication. It is verse, not naturalism. To arrive at truthful expression through verse, we need in some way to embrace the scale of the language. Everything an actor needs to discover is in the language of the text. Shakespeare had this in mind when he wrote. All the clues an actor needs are there. They just need to know how to uncover them. It's all in the words. Every reference from the Elizabethans attending performances in the 17th century is referred to as hearing. Let's go hear a play tomorrow, not see a play. Hamlet says, "We'll hear a play tomorrow." And when Hamlet invites the king to the murder of Gonzago, the play within the play, he says, "Will the king hear this piece of work?" Shakespeare was writing for an audience that didn't go to the theater to watch, they went to listen. The etymology of the word audience is from the Latin audientia, from audire, to hear. Adrian Noble again points out, quote, "Imagine the actors on the opening night of Hamlet in 1601, eager to dazzle and electrify their audience. How would they do this? There were no lights. They performed in daylight. No sets to speak of, no fancy costumes, no special effects. There were only words. They did it through language," end quote. Shakespeare, of course, knew this. Since the concept of a director, as we know it today, was non-existent, Shakespeare directed his actors through his texts. If one knows what to look for, one can see Shakespeare has laid out a roadmap for the actor to follow that will take them to that place of being credible. It may seem obfuscated at first glance, but if one keeps at it, his direction of the actor will eventually reveal itself. The great Shakespeare scholar Harold Bloom said, and I love this, "Shakespeare is forever ahead of you, but he always waits for you to catch up." I do not spend a lot of time breaking down trochees, anapaests, dactyls, etc. Mechanical terms in themselves are ultimately of less importance to me. What counts is that the actors experience the rhythms and the meter of the poetry for themselves, and that they understand verse from their guts rather than from their heads. They do, however, need to cultivate a sense of rhythm, and especially have a feeling for iambic pentameter. Let's just lay out what that is. It's very simple. An iamb is a metrical foot consisting of one short or unstressed syllable followed by one long or stressed syllable. It goes like this, da-dum. Couldn't be simpler. Pentameter simply means that same iamb 5 times. Penta being Greek for 5. So it's very simple. Da-dum, 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 da-dum. This rhythm is sacrosanct to the text. It has to underlie everything. It is the conveyor belt on which everything moves, right? So I often think of it like a drummer in a rock and roll band. The drums aren't the most featured thing, the thing that you're most aware of, but they carry the beat of the music. They make the music move. That's how I think of iambic pentameter. The actors need to feel it. They need to breathe it. They need to get their hearts beating to it. But its importance lies mostly in the time when Shakespeare chooses not to use it. Every human being is born with this pulse, this rhythm. It's the sound of your mother's heart beating before you were born. A feeling for rhythm is as natural as breathing. It is already inside all of us. My hope is simply that students become aware of its existence and notice how it's utilized in the text. And I'd like to try to share my screen here. Can I do this? Oh boy. Oh. Okay, thank you. I see it. Can you all see that? Iambic pentameter, da-dum, 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 da-dum. If music be the food of love, play on. It is the east and Juliet is the sun. Okay, Juliet here being bisyllabic, right? That makes it a perfect iambic line. I but to die and go, we know not where. Good morrow, Kate, for that's your name I hear. The barge she sat in like a burnished throne, etc., etc. You get the idea. But now when Shakespeare takes that same rhythm and flips it or does something strange with it, that's a clue to the actor. And that's Shakespeare's directing hand, reaching in, sort of poking the actor in the ribs and saying, hey, take a look at this. This is different. Something else is happening here. And he leaves it up to the actor to fill in the last part of that answer. What is it? Why? Why is this arrhythmic? For example, to be or not to be, that is the question. There's an extra beat in there. That's what's called a feminine ending, which is unimportant. But what is happening rhythmically is something very atypical is happening. Remember that subconsciously, the audience has been hearing for up to this point, probably an hour and a half into the play, they've been hearing da-dum, 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 da-dum. And then all of a sudden they hear da-dum, 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 dum. Now, nobody in the audience understands, oh, look at there, a feminine ending, something's going on. No, but there is something visceral in their understanding of this moment that's happening on stage that is different. So look at this. This is Leontes from Winter's Tale here. I don't know. Can you guys see my cursor moving? No. Inch thick, knee deep, or head and ears a forked one. Okay. So very, very herky jerky, arrhythmic. What's going on? Why would Shakespeare do that? Certainly, he's a good enough writer that if he wanted this to be a perfect iambic line, he could have done it. So this is, again, it's a clue. It's all over Shakespeare. all these clues as to, this is Shakespeare reaching out and saying, hey, actor, look at this. Something is going on here. Well, the situation is that Leontes is spiraling down into the throes of jealousy about his wife and Polixenes, right? So he is on very shaky ground. This is not, it's not if music be the food of love, play on, right? That's Orsino in Twelfth Night, a guy very versed at being in love and expressing himself in love and swooning over love. This is his go-to. But Leontes in Winter's Tale is freaking out, and his rhythm is freaking out as well. And the last one down there, never, 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 very famous passage. You all probably know that's from King Lear, walking out with his dead Cordelia draped in his arms. So just imagine how the entire rhythm of this line is flipped. Instead of da-dum, iambic, it's da-dum. It's a trochee, right? Again, totally unimportant, the nomenclature. But the feeling is different. And Shakespeare, again, cannot allow the actor to express this moment in a perfect iambic way. He needs to flip it on its head. So it's never, 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 never. And you can understand that an audience, having sat through 3 hours of iambic pentameter, for the most part, will now come out with this completely flipped line. It will have an effect on the audience. But the idea is not to have an effect on the audience, right? The idea is for it to be a signpost for the actor to follow. And whatever the actor does with that will be a completely personal choice, up to the actor, depending on their own imagination, their own creativity, their own life history, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Shakespeare's just telling you something is going on here. Pay attention. Okay, thank you, Stephen. Be ready. There'll be more to come. I'm so sorry. So what are these 10 textual elements? And again, we're not going to go into each one of them because I just don't have time. I would love to, because I really love this stuff, but there just isn't time. So there are 10 of them. That's usually good news for students, right? Because they figure, oh, I got three quarters to learn 10 things. What they don't know is that it really takes a lifetime to incorporate, to have this stuff pay off for them. But they can learn the theory of it, I think, relatively easily. They are this. I'll list them for you here. Living thought, apposition, meter, pulse, rhythm, metaphors, parentheticals and rhymes, line endings, punctuation, end stops, run-on, sustained thought, etc. Prose, what do you do with prose? Which is different from poetry, right? Driving the narrative, how does that work? Soliloquy, what do you do with the soliloquy? And finally, dialogue, which is the last one. But let's start with, there are just a couple of them that I just want to lay in here, and then hopefully we'll have time to look at a couple of pieces of work. But the most important one, and the one that is sort of the canopy that envelops all the other 9, is this idea of living thought. It is the most important one. It applies directly to Shakespeare, but it also applies directly to all contemporary work that people do. It's also the hardest one to grasp. It's the hardest one to explain. Nothing of value, in my opinion, can happen on stage without living thought. If we're not engaged in living thought, all we are doing is coming to the theater to see somebody reciting some predetermined idea that now they just happen to be spouting or regurgitating while they're standing on stage. I would describe living thought this way. And again, I'm not sure I've got the right words to describe it. It takes a long time for actors to grasp it. But Shakespeare's complete works are the greatest record of subconscious human thought made conscious. His characters reveal their subconscious and discover words as they speak. Even they are surprised by their own cleverness. And they admit that to the audience. They invent words. They do not recite anything. A character must know the beginning of the thought, and then he or she launches that thought, and from there, it's a voyage of discovery. The character does not know at the beginning of a line or speech or scene where any of this will go. He or she must fresh mint the words, surprise him or herself with what is discovered. Each word or line gives unexpected birth to a new area of thought on which they embark, and that new area of thought in turn gives birth to the next. And so it's this way, it's constantly evolving. A speech, therefore, becomes a series of epiphanies, constantly taking the speaker by surprise. It must seem that the character is choosing his words spontaneously in the moment of speaking them. And so there are many ways to tackle this concept. But let me just take you through, arguably the most famous speech in all dramatic literature, to be or not to be, that is the question, right? So what's going on in there? There's an extra beat there. So that tells me, something atypical is going on here. I'm dealing with a very existential concept, something that isn't just pass the salt, right? I'm talking about life and death. And so Shakespeare has given me an extra beat. If I find it on the extra beat, of course, one can always say to be or not to be, that is the question. Perfectly valid. But if you use that extra beat to discover it, you can say to be or not to be, that is the question. Oh my God. It's as if you put a silent, isn't it extraordinary, at the end of the line, right? There's also in there a double consonant. And Shakespeare, I believe, does this purposefully. Where's the double? There's double consonant or double sound. So he says, to be or not to be. So one, again, could very plausibly say to be or not to be, that is the question. But if you take those two sounds and give yourself, you the actor, a caesura between them to find the next part of the thought, then it's more of an epiphany. It's happening as you're speaking. So you could say to be or not to be, that is the question, or you could say to be or not to be, that is the question. Isn't it extraordinary, right? And this is Shakespeare directing you to do it. So let's break down living thought. Here, I'll give you another quick example. Claudio in Measure says, I but to die and go we know not where. Wow, big line, right? Big, gigantic, existential, to die, and where do we go when we die, right? But he's got these two sounds in there that are equal. And so to my mind, in rehearsal, an actor might want to explore what it means to find the thought in between those two sounds. You could say, of course, I but to die and go we know not where, but you could also find it in the caesura and say, I but to die and go, we know not where. It allows the actor to discover it in the moment. And Shakespeare has put the notation in the line to help the actor identify that possibly this might be something that will be helpful. So again, living thought, that's the first part of it. Living, it lives, it's alive, it's constantly invented. This idea of invention is right in keeping with the zeitgeist of the time when Shakespeare was writing, right? Shakespeare himself, he invented words all the time. And he felt free to do so because there was no standard like we have today. The language today is constantly evolving, of course, but during Shakespeare's day, the language was virtually exploding, and at a pace we can't even imagine. They say he's responsible for adding somewhere around 1,700 words to the English language, also a lot of phrases. At least the first time we see them, they appear in Shakespeare plays. Stephen, if you can just, while I'm talking, there should be one up there that says words invented by, let me see if I can find it. Yeah, some words. Do you see it there? And you know, there wasn't even a standardization of spelling, which is hard for us to imagine. The same word might be spelled 3 different ways in the same paragraph. There was no dictionary for anyone to consult. It was nearly 150 years later, after Shakespeare's death, that Samuel Johnson published his great dictionary of the English language. Though in 1604, there was an attempt by a guy named Robert Cawdry in his, what he called Table Alphabetical, gathered for the benefit and help of ladies, gentlemen, and any other unskillful persons. Even proper names were not consistent. Shakespeare's own signature is spelled quite differently on different documents. And there's another one in there, but it really doesn't matter. So you can understand that the very idea of inventing words to fill the need of a moment was commonplace. This is useful to keep in mind as we act Shakespeare. These characters, too, invent their words as they go to suit the given situation. That's the living part of living thought. So what about thought? Again, we're discussing thought here, not feeling. The thought is the challenging thing to nail down. The thought is what the character is grappling with, not the feeling. Feeling, that will find its own way. Leave it alone. An actor mustn't direct his efforts to feeling or emotion. What we're concerned with here is rationale, rhetoric, debate, either within yourself or with another person. Any pain or joy or emotion the character may be dealing with will make itself obvious if the actor can get the thought right. Shakespeare's plays are the greatest record of human thinking and the human thought process, and his plays are merely a blueprint for live performance. Living thought leads the actor to stream of consciousness and discovery in almost every line. We must think of Shakespeare's characters when they speak as human beings thinking and going on a journey of discovery or even revelation. If one is successful at this, there ends up being no separation between the word and the thought. This is what we commonly hear in actor training programs as thinking on the word. That phrase is tossed around a lot, but this is what it means. Shakespeare himself even says it when Hamlet is giving advice to the actors. He says, suit the action to the word to the action, not feeling or emotion, the action. Now, the great practitioners of living thought make it look so effortless that the technique of it is invisible. So that's the big, living thought is the big canopy that overshadows everything. The second one is apposition. And let me see, Stephen, if I've got here. And yes, so and we'll just do a couple of lines here, but let's pull up the Hamlet doc, if you don't mind, since that's a speech everyone knows. Can you get that? Thank you. Oh, can everyone see that? So apposition is the juxtaposition, because there's apposition and there's juxtaposition. I prefer the term apposition because I think the concept is bigger for me than just juxtaposition. Juxtaposition, to my mind, means one thing against another. Apposition is a much more profound use of this technique. So, an apposition is the juxtaposition of one word with another, one phrase or sentence with another, one idea against another, or even one speech against another. And this apposition is Shakespeare's go-to technique. It's everywhere in his plays. All his characters speak in apposition. He uses this technique all the time. And it's up to the actor to play these appositions fully. So let's take this. To be or not to be, that is the question. Well, I think the apposition is as crystal clear as it could possibly be there. To be, on the one hand, or not to be, okay? And so I try to ask the actors to scale it. Put it in one hand, then put the other thought in the other. It's like the cornerstone of a bridge. One idea has no value unless it is leaning up against the other idea. To be or not to be, that is the question, right? Now look at the next apposition, because the next apposition happened in 2-line segments. Whether 'tis nobler in the mind to suffer the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune, or to take arms against a sea of troubles and by opposing end them. Okay, so that's an apposition too. It just takes 2 lines to make each thing clear. See if there's a Richard III document that you could pull up there, Richard, if you don't mind. Richard III document, Stephen, if you don't mind. Okay, so this is Gloucester. This is the very beginning of the play. So let's look at this. Now is the winter of our discontent made glorious summer by this son of York. Okay, couple things going on there. Winter, summer, clear apposition, right? And all the clouds that lowered upon our house in the deep bosom of the ocean buried. Now are our brows bound with victorious wreaths, our bruised arms hung up for monuments, our stern alarums changed to merry meetings, our dreadful marches to delightful measures. Grim-visaged war hath smoothed his wrinkled front, and now, instead of mounting barbed steeds to fright the souls of fearful adversaries, he capers nimbly in a lady's chamber to the lascivious pleasing of a lute. Pretty clear appositions going on there. Sometimes it's word against word, sometimes it's phrase against phrase, sometimes it's chunk against chunk, but they happen all the way through Shakespeare. The other concept that I want to touch on is something called sustained thought. And this ends up being, for me, the hardest thing for students to grasp. Sustained thought is keeping a thought sustained through its iteration until its conclusion. And so, Stephen, while I'm talking, if you could pull up one that's called, let me, come on, let's see here. Really? Inflection, yes, please, inflection. Eva will know all about this. So it's how you need to identify what the entire thought is, and then you have to keep it sustained. You do that through vocal inflection. So this is one side of this lesson, right? You can see it says upward inflection there. So an upward inflection is simply the lilt of your voice goes up. So now is the winter of our discontent made glorious summer by the son of York. Now, as long as I keep it up, the audience is with me. I'm not letting them off the hook until I'm ready to give them a downward inflection. A downward inflection happens on a period, exclamation points, sometimes on question marks. A level inflection keeps the thought going. And then there's circumflection, which usually one would use at a semicolon or a colon. Again, it's halfway ending the thought and halfway letting the audience know there's more to come. So the idea of sustained thought and using inflection to do it is only one half of the equation, because everybody can learn to do it technically. You can learn to modulate your voice so that it goes up, or it goes in a circumflection, or it goes down. And what happens mostly is that these actors do their speeches, downgliding every 3 words. And you can imagine if you're downgliding your way through a large role in Shakespeare, the audience is just going to check out. They're going to stop listening, because every time you downglide, subconsciously their energy drops as well. And after they've done that enough times over 3 hours, they've had enough, and I don't blame them. So that's one. Manipulating your voice is one half of it. The more interesting part to me is that if I know I have to sustain this thought for 15 lines, 20 lines, if I'm not reaching a conclusion until the end of the speech, then what is it that, what is that need or that trigger or that spark that is launching the speech? Why the actor has to ask himself or herself what it is. Why is their need so great? Why are they not concluding this in 2 lines? Their imagination, their own life experience, etc., will help answer those questions. I just want them to know, I want them to see, wow, Shakespeare is ending this, 20 lines. I got to get through 20 lines to get there. Why? What is going on with my character that it takes me that long to end this thought? So that's the more interesting part of the work for me. The last one I want to look at quickly is, you'll see, Stephen, if you don't mind, there's one in there called, I believe, King John. So King John is a lesser known play of Shakespeare's, but it's awfully good. John comes into the throne and there's a young boy. John takes the throne and this young boy is actually in line. Excuse me, should have been king, and John took the throne from this young boy. John has a henchman named Hubert, and this little passage says a lot about Shakespeare's directing hand. So let's just go through this together. King John, who is the king after all and has this henchman, but he needs plausible deniability, right? So he has to be very careful and choose his words cautiously. So first of all, I see here, he repeats his name 3 times. So that's always a clue to me, right? Of course, you could say, good Hubert, Hubert, Hubert. But there's some just juice in there of what are the reasons that he wants to repeat this? Hubert, Hubert, Hubert. Let me talk to you, right? Throw thine eye on yon young boy. Now, if you look at I at the end of that first line, there's no punctuation there. So that's what I call a run-on sentence. He says, throw thine eye on yon young boy. There's a punctuation after boy, there's a colon. Now, when Shakespeare puts a punctuation in the middle of a line, that's usually Shakespeare telling the actor, hey, hurry up. Don't indulge in a pause here. I know you may have the instinct to take a moment here, but don't. I don't want you to. So the actor has to find the reason that he needs to keep going. Good Hubert, Hubert, Hubert. Throw thine eye on yon young boy. I'll tell thee what, my friend, right? So we're jumping right on to the end of that line. He is a very serpent in my way, a little circumflection there for the semicolon. And wheresoe'er this foot of mine doth tread, he lies before me. Dost thou understand me? That's where that question mark is. That's what I call an end stop. So it is permissible, it is possible for the actor to take a moment there. Shakespeare is allowing you to do it. So King John spits all this out to Hubert in very hushed tones without speaking directly to what it is he wants Hubert to do, which is to kill this kid. So he says that he's a serpent in my way. He lies before wherever I walk, there he is. Do you understand what I'm saying? And there's a moment. Hubert does not respond. So John has to go further. After the moment, realizing that Hubert is not answering, he says, thou art his keeper. You know what to do. You're the guy who's overseeing this kid. And then Hubert, you look at this, where keeper is and where Hubert's first word is. Thou art his keeper and I'll keep him so. That's what we call, it's a $10 word. It's actually very simple. It's called stickomythia. So that's a stickomythic line. That means that Shakespeare wants Hubert, the Hubert actor, to pick up this cue. Because thou art his keeper and I'll keep him so, if you moved and I'll keep him so up a space, you would see that it's a perfectly iambic line. Thou art his keeper and I'll keep him so, right? Perfect line. Shakespeare nudging the actor, pick up your cue. Thou art his keeper, John says, and I'll keep him so that he shall not offend your majesty. End stop, period, at the end of the line. Well, this is not going well for King John because Hubert doesn't seem to want to pick up on the clues, right? So finally, after this end stop on majesty, King John has to spell it out. And he says, death. And then look after death. There's a big, long space of nothingness. So if you're an actor or a director, you got to notice that. What's going on in that space? This is a very tense moment. John has spelled it out. He said death. And Hubert is like, wait, are you asking me to do what I think you're asking me to do? And all of that moment happens in silence. And finally, Hubert says, excuse me, my lord, a grave, he shall not live enough. You see how stickomythic those next lines are? If you moved all those lines up to Hubert's line, it would make another perfect iambic line, right? My lord, a grave, he shall not live enough. So that's Shakespeare telling you, pick up this cue, make it move. Don't indulge between each of those moments. And it's to the actors to take the form that Shakespeare heard in his head when he was writing. That's why Shakespeare did it that way. It's up to the actors to take that form and repeat it and allow it to show them what the moment needs to be. So I just want to, okay, you can get out of there now. I want to end now because there's so much more, but I think it's time to wrap this up. and I want to wrap this up in an odd way because somehow it distinguishes for me anyway, this stark distinction that I feel between the technique, which I think can be taught, and the art, which in my estimation cannot be taught. How artists are inspired by what they see on the page, in the notation of Shakespeare's text, how that can lead them to inspiration and allow something profoundly personal in them to be revealed. So again, I want to go back to Tom Stoppard here. He talks about this production of The Tempest that he saw. And this is he encapsulates how something seemingly innocuous and simple, like a blank space, or the way the lines are formatted against each other, can have profound implication for the actor or director. So I'm going to assume that everyone here knows something about Shakespeare's The Tempest and the character of Ariel, who is actually the embodiment of an element, and in this case, the element of air. Ariel has performed his work loyally for Prospero, and now Prospero sets him free to return to his element. And this is what Tom said. Years and years ago, there was a production of The Tempest out of doors at an Oxford college on a lawn, which was the stage. And the lawn went back to the lake in the grounds of the college, and the play began in natural light. But as it developed, and as it became time for Ariel to say his farewell to the world of The Tempest, the evening had started to close in, and there was some artificial light coming on. As Ariel uttered his last speech, he turned and he ran across the grass, and he got to the edge of the lake, and he just kept running across the top of the water. The producer, having thoughtfully provided a kind of walkway an inch beneath the water.
Oh.
And you could see and hear the plish plash as he ran away from you across the top of the lake until the gloom enveloped him and he disappeared from view.
Oh my God.
At that moment, from the further shore, a firework rocket was ignited, and it went whoosh into the air, and high up there it burst into a lot of sparks, and then all the sparks went out and he had gone. When you look up the stage directions, it says exit Ariel. Thank you all very much.